Well, now here's a grim one. According to international stats, up to 5 children are murdered almost daily as a result of parental abuse.
Well, children's rights activists fear this figure could be even higher in South Africa compared to the global average. As part of our 16 days of activism coverage, we highlight the case of a toddler allegedly brutally beaten to death by his mother's partner. And we do just want to say that some of these images are going to be graphic.
His autopsy revealed a shocking pattern of abuse. The images too graphic to share. Had the 5-year-old survived, this would have been his teddy bear. 2 weeks ago, he was admitted to an Alexandra clinic, dead on arrival.
Literally every single bone in his body was fractured. So I can't begin to imagine the amount of pain that this child had to endure. What is even more horrific is that his sister had to witness all of that. The sibling who did pass away, he just had massive head injuries, and that was his cause of death.
The perpetrator did not only abuse, he allegedly killed his biological son. His 8-year-old stepdaughter was also a victim. She's lucky to have survived.
The injuries that were sustained by both of them were horrific. Multiple long bone injuries. So we had injuries at different stages of healing, and obviously none of them were attended to. The lashings on the back, you can see, have already formed keloids.
2 vulnerable siblings, injuries and a death that could have been prevented had their mother broken her silence.
How much force and how much.
But she too allegedly suffered at his hands. In not reporting, she's been charged with culpable homicide.
All of this could have actually been stopped if the mom had asked for the help that was offered to her, and if she hadn't just turned a blind eye. So by remaining silent, she consented to her children being abused this way.
Her partner, who fled to a neighboring country, has been charged with murder.
The police were absolutely brilliant in finding the alleged perpetrator and bringing him back to South Africa so that he could pay for what he has done.
The message: if your partner is abusing you, report it. Often children in the home also fall victim to physical violence. By speaking out, the vicious cycle can be broken. Gillian Pillay, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, for more on this, we're joined now by Dr. Shaheda Omar, Director of the Teddy Bear Clinic. Good evening to you, and thank you so much for coming in. Listen, you and I will have many conversations over the years, but this is certainly one that is just too awful to even think about. I mean, you know, a bereaved parent is one thing, but to be one at your own hands is just an extraordinary thought, is it not?
Indeed, and I think if we just look at the statistics, it's not an accurate reflection of what is happening on the ground. We finding that many other cases are falling through the cracks, undetected. But as the statistics have indicated, that at least every 3rd day, a child is dying because of abuse and neglect. And more than 985 children in the past year have been victims of murder. So this is something, it's more than just a tragedy. One cannot even begin to condone, justify. It's just absolutely unacceptable.
One of the things that's extraordinary, and there have been a number of cases over the years, is not only the really unbelievable idea of parents who might be complicit in the deaths of their own children, but a number of cases have demonstrated that these children often die very violent deaths.
Indeed, I think if we see that a lot of these children are subjected to the use of blunt force and trauma that has been inflicted, physical trauma. And I think if we just look at the recent cases of Stacey Andrews, Courtney Peters, we know that these cases these victims were subjected to that kind of physical force. And it is usually somebody within the confines or somebody that has access and is closely connected.
Sure. I understand that as a general crime, but speak to me specifically then about children who suffer this kind of abuse and eventually are killed, if not by their own parents, certainly a partner of the parent. In other words, the very people who are meant to be their protectors are the ones who are perpetrating these crimes. Speak to me about that.
And we find that often in those cases, it's an act of vengeance against the partner. There's interpersonal violence because the one partner is disgruntled or unhappy with his spouse. We've had a case in the Palm Ridge court where it was the mother's boyfriend who had brutally killed a 4-year-old and had used physical force over a long period of time. But even family members, when you speak about being complacent and complicit, that family members had done nothing. This 4-year-old was totally powerless and at the mercy of adults who were supposed to protect him.
Talk to me about that complacency and talk to me about that complicity, because for people who don't understand the situation, it's extraordinarily difficult to even begin to understand, particularly a mom, for example, who may choose to look the other way.
And often that usually occurs in cases of domestic violence, where the mom is usually afraid. There's excessive fear of being violated, fear of being abandoned, fear of being blamed by other people. And in those instances, when I spoke about this Palm Ridge case, this was exactly the situation where the mother turned a blind eye because of fear, and her justification was that she was afraid she would be brutalized and she would suffer the consequences if she had taken some form of action, which resulted in a tragedy, the death of this 4-year-old.
I mean, in many cases, courts have had a view that quite often what lay people may see as complicity is really a secondary victimization, and they've often seen women in those situations in particular as also victims.
Indeed, and again, it's often the fear that if I do something about this, I'm going to be hurt, I'm going to be violated, there's no way out of this situation, and therefore they become complicit, they complacent and become complicit and colluders. We often find that these mothers are colluders. They actually enablers because they're not taking action against a child who is not able to protect himself or herself.
So is the idea that they too were victimized, is that good enough to not do anything?
That's not good enough. A history of victimization, yes, it is a reality, it's a harsh reality, but there is the power of choice. The child does not have the ability to take that choice or make a decision or reach out, but an adult has that ability to do so.
And yet, of course, we also know that as much as people can be encouraged to speak out, to make their voices heard, to go and seek help, as you've already outlined in this discussion, there are so many other factors. Yes, victimization is one, but the idea that, sometimes the man who's a breadwinner in the family will be gone.
Often financial dependency, the economic dependency is a huge contributory factor.
So is it as easy then as saying speak out?
Well, it's not easy, but it has to be done because children, the voiceless, need to be given a voice, and who better to give a voice than the adult who is there to protect the child.
But is there enough support in terms of how all of this is meant to function, from the police to social workers? Is there enough support for women in this type of crisis that allows them to see a clear path out of this situation?
So Bongani, if we just go back a few years, not even long ago, 5 years ago, there weren't enough platforms or resources. But if we look at the past 2 years, there's been such a mobilization of action where women's groups have come together, resources and platforms have been created, that women today have more access to resources than we previously had. If we look at the domestic helpline, the 082 number that has been created by the Department of Social Development, that was non-existent. It is something that is now available and accessible to people. So I do believe there has been considerable progress. I'm not saying that we've reached the ideal.
You need a phone, you need airtime, You need to be able to know that you can make the phone call and not be discovered. I mean, there are a number of factors around what you do practically.
But we need to move from the shift of bystanderism to activism. So it's an indictment on society. If that individual is stuck, is immobilized, it's a call to action to other people to mobilize that person, to support and not turn a blind eye. Because I find...
Explain how that support should work. I mean, if neighbors, if family members, if friends have some intimation of what might be going on,
and that is often the case, where friends, families, neighbors are actually aware, because often we find this is a pattern. People are actually aware of what is going on, or they have some suspicion or inkling that things are not okay, that there's dysfunctional behavior, there's domestic violence, there's child abuse. They need to actually call out for support, be it the Family Violence, Child Protection and Sexual Offences Unit, be it a designated child protection organization, be it the flying squad. But there needs to be this kind of response where everyone in society takes it upon themselves to ensure that children are protected at all costs. We need to create a more enabling and nurturing environment for the protection of children.
On the other hand, you could argue that obviously abusers have a sense of what they can get away with, that it almost always isn't the child first. It's usually you disempower the other figure, you disempower the people who would stand up for this child. So by the time the abuser gets to the children, the other figure in the household has been neutralized over years of abuse. And sometimes it's even almost a relief that it's not them, for a change, who are at the receiving end of this abuse. That sounds awful, but that does happen.
Absolutely. That's the modus operandi of an abuser, where they would certainly disempower the partner, and the partner would eventually feel totally out of control, feel powerless, helpless, hopeless.
So, fancy slogans, fancy campaigns, 16 days of activism. We do this every year at this time. Is it working? Is it falling on deaf ears? Or are we talking to the converted?
I think we need to adopt a different stance. Just highlighting or platforming during the 16 days of activism is certainly not sufficient. What we need to do is, this needs to be a daily campaign. We need to repeat this. We need to educate our little children.
So isn't there some, I mean, again, I say, this campaign in particular has been around for a number of years now, and yet we've seen the scourge continue and in fact worsen. Isn't there an idea that the people that are the abusers aren't motivated by all the fancy talk? In the moment, when they're angry, when they're frustrated, when they want to lash out, they do so because they can.
And that's where we need to take more action, or stringent action, where even the criminal justice system, law enforcement agencies need to be more empathic. I think often when victims go out and report, the way they are received, or at station level, they're often turned away, because they are told, this is a domestic issue, it will be resolved, or it can be resolved. So I think there needs to be more concerted efforts and sensitivity towards victims of violence.
But certainly the emergence of specialized courts for sexual offences, that's a development that's to be welcomed.
Certainly, and we're not there yet. We are. There's been great progress, and I do believe that there's room for more progress and improvement.
Right, your final message. Maybe someone's watching us right now as we are talking. They're in this trap. Their child is being abused, and they're watching, and they're thinking, I don't know what to do. I don't have the power. What do you say?
Well, I always say one thing is that if you do not speak out today, it may be too late tomorrow. Tomorrow may cost the life of your child, which is a tragedy, a life you can never bring back.
Who will speak for the voiceless? That's the question, is it not? Thank you very much, Dr. Shaheda Omar, Director of the Teddy Bear Clinic.